I think the role of the bus is quite significant actually, and it's one of the main means of reaching a more climate environmentally cities especially.
The Swedish bus and coach sector leads the transition to climate friendly transport sector. Ulu mentioned the figure 90%. That's true in the tender traffic, and overall the bus and coach sector in Sweden today to 85% runs on fossil-free fuels. We lead the shift, and we're very proud of that.
The result of their investigation was that in Helsinki by 2030, the mobility as a service can reduce CO2 emissions by up to 260 to 300,000 tons. And by 2045, the reduction was estimated to be 580,000 tons. So I would say that's another proof that mobility as a service can have a real impact and real potential.
The future of the mobility is going to be shared, driverless and electric. And we can use the technology to assess the problems like climate change and congestion, while at the same time providing affordable and accessible mobility to everybody equally.
I think we have to focus more around the passenger and the passenger need and use the technology to have a more flexible traffic than we have today.
We envisioned a future where autonomous small vehicles were available to everyone. What we see is that unless we make our passengers share the vehicle, we will have a large traffic problem even if we reduce the number of vehicles on the road. So incentivizing shared use of vehicles is key.
Kumaran, moikka kaikille ja terveiset Helsingistä. Good morning and greetings from Helsinki. A warm welcome to all of you online. My name is Mikko Nummi and I am working for company Messuille Oy. We represent Messe Berlin in Finland. Our job is to help companies to find and navigate their way in Messe Berlin events, both exhibitors and visitors. So happy that so many of you made it today. Today we have a great lineup of speakers from Nordic countries to share their views on passenger transport. And before we get to that, I would like to pass this further for my other colleagues in Nordic countries. Teresa from Norway, Catherine from Sweden, and Helga from Denmark. Så varsågod Teresa.
God morgon allesammans fra Oslo i Norge. Good morning everyone. My name is Teresa. I'm working in the German-Norwegian Chamber of Commerce as a representative for Messe Berlin. We are part of a network of German chambers all over the world, helping the bilateral things to do between the countries. And then Catherine is the next one to say good morning to you.
Välkommen alla svenska deltagare and good morning to everyone. My name is Katrin and I'm working for the German-Swedish Chamber in Stockholm, Sweden, and we are the representatives for the Messe Berlin here in Sweden. And as Teresa already said, we are also one of the members of the German IHK Netzwerk, the German Chamber of Commerce network, and I think all the Swedish participants today already were in contact with my colleague Michelle Faber, who is in charge of the Bus2BUS. And if there are any questions, please feel free to contact her. And from my side, enjoy the Nordic Roadshow today, and I will hand over to Helga. Bye.
Thank you. Goddag og også et hjertelig velkommen fra mig her i Danmark. Welcome to all from you. Welcome to all to you from Denmark. My name is Helga and I'm working for the company Strauss & Partners in the northwestern part of Denmark. Strauss & Partner was founded in 1996 by Jens Strauss. He has a background as a head of the office of the Danish Ministry of Industry in Germany and as EU transport project leader, as a CEO in Danish companies and as a board member in Danish and German Belgium companies. Today our company is working with international trade fairs, such as Messe Berlin. Yes, Please enjoy, and that's all from my side. Thank you for listening, and I will pass on to Willow Beck-Jewett, project organizer for BUS2BUS. She will give us a short presentation about BUS2BUS 2022, facts and dates, and roadshow outline and framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Helga. Also a very, very warm welcome from my side to all of our participants and viewers and panelists today. We are really, really excited about this live event, and we've had a few other roadshows in different countries and have had a great experience with this. But before we get started on our Nordic roadshow, I would just like to mention that we will be taking place on site in Berlin in April, the 27th and the 28th. And I'd just like to say a few words about BUS2BUS before we start with our Nordic roadshow. So BUS2BUS premiered in 2017 and happened again in 2019. And it was supposed to happen in 2021, but unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we have shifted to this year, the end of April in Berlin. But we had a digital event in 2021, and it was called the BUS2BUS Special Edition. And it really underlined one thing, and that is that the bus is a sustainable and innovative and flexible element in the mobility mix of the future. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's underrated or it's undervalued as a mode of transport, and when actually it's one of the upcoming stars in mobility. So at BUS2BUS 2022, we really want to focus on shaping the image of the bus, as well as putting a focus on the new innovations and changes in the bus industry at the moment. For the people that will be joining us on site in Berlin the end of April, I'd like to just mention what you can expect to experience there. The ticket that we offer includes all three elements of BUS2BUS, and that includes the trade show, where we have, of course, the stands and the buses within the trade show halls. We have an outdoor display with test drives, and we have also a startup area. Included in our ticket is also the stage program. So that's combined of two tracks. That's the Future Forum and the BDO Congress from our partner, the German Association of Bus and Coach Operators, who are located here in Berlin as well. And this year, we're really going to focus on topics like alternative drives, autonomous vehicles, intelligent driving, political issues, and fresh travel. And the stages are located within our trade show halls, so right in the center of the action. And our panels will either take place in German or English, and we'll have corresponding translation for our international guests. And the last but not least, the element is called Bus2 Specials, which is also included in your ticket, and that includes interactive workshops, the opportunity to watch our startup competition, as well as some exhibitor presentations on stage talking about the innovations that they've brought with them this year. And I think I speak for the whole team when I say we are really excited to greet everyone there, not only between the 2 years that we've waited in between normal events, but also the shift this year to 2022. We are really excited and are looking positively, even though there is a pandemic going on, we are very positive and looking positive towards the future that we will happen at the end of April. Before we introduce all of our panelists, I would just like to mention that we have the possibility here to talk live to our mobility experts and ask questions today during the roadshow. So please, I would really like everyone to use the opportunity to put their questions in the box below the live stream, and we will get to that at the end in our Q&A. I'm very, very pleased today to be able to introduce our moderator. His name is Ulo Maasing from Sweden. And he is bringing a lot of experience in the bus and coach sector, as well as journalism, and is currently the editor-in-chief at the online mobility platform called Bussmagasinet. I hope I said that right, Ulo. Anyways, welcome, Ulo, to our roadshow. And before we begin, I'd like to just ask you a few short questions.
Please, thank you for having me. And just shoot with your questions, and I'll see what I can answer.
Yes. So my first question is about a topic that we can't seem to avoid at the moment, and that's the pandemic. And the pandemic has hit a lot of industries really hard and has made a lot of challenges. And I wanted to ask your opinion. How has the bus industry been affected by the pandemic? And do you think the bus industry will bounce back afterwards?
Well, like in any country actually in the world, the Nordic and Swedish bus and coach industry has taken quite a beating. When it comes to public transport, the public transport sector, last year, well, actually the first year of the pandemic, ridership was down drastically in the streets of Stockholm. The buses ran as normal because the PTAs kept the service levels up, but the buses ran more or less empty. And of course, that made a huge financial pressure on the PTAs. And that is one of the challenges that the industry stands for. When it comes to the coach industry, it came to a total standstill, I would say. We didn't have, like in Germany, restrictions that it was forbidden to go on coach trips. But in reality, we had the same situation because there were no events, there were no theaters running, international travel was more or less impossible. So the coaches were standing still. Last summer, it started to pick up, both the public transport and the coach industry. And then came the Omicron variant, and it all went down. But it's not as much down as it was during the first pandemic years. Will it bounce back? Well, that's a question that I don't have any crystal ball, but I think there will be some challenges. One of the challenges is financial, because the Swedish government has not covered all the costs, all the loss of revenue that the PTAs have had. Maybe they cover a third of it. So this points toward future reductions in public transport. Another challenge is actually on the driver side, because the industry, as you know, uses a lot of drivers working extra for them, especially in the coach industry, and they found themselves different jobs, no jobs. They've left the industry. So when it once picks up again, the driver shortage that we have seen is going to be even worse, I think, than it has been, and that's a major challenge. So even if the buses and coaches, or rather the bus and coach companies, want to operate, they have fewer people to put behind the wheel.
Yes, I believe that'll be very challenging. And as you said, I think we all wish that we had the glass ball to look into the future and see what's going to happen. My second question for you is, I mentioned earlier that I really believe that the bus has a lot of potential to be a lot more popular as a mode of transport, and partially because of its flexibility in size, as well as being able to adapt to alternative drives and to different mobility concepts. And Ulo, how do you feel, what role is the bus going to take or play in becoming, in helping sustainable mobility and being able to achieve quite ambitious and challenging climate target goals?
I think the role of the bus is quite significant, actually, and it's one of the main means of reaching a more climate environmentally cities, especially. But I won't go too much into it, because there are some issues, and part of the problem, I think, at least from the Scandinavian and Swedish point of view, is Brussels and the European Union and what's coming out of there from concerning like fossil-free fuels and so on. And I'd actually like to pass this question a little bit on to Anna Grönlund from the Swedish Bus and Coach Federation, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'll hand the digital microphone over to you, Ulo, and we can introduce all of our panelists, and you can continue on with Anna Grönlund and the other participants for today. So I wish everybody a good discussion and have fun.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I'll introduce the panelists one by one, not like when I introduce them and put questions to them. And so I'd like to introduce Anna Grönlund for you. Anna Grönlund is more or less, I'd say, born into the bus and coach industry, and she's been working in it for many, many years. She is now the deputy manager of the Swedish Bus and Coach Federation. She has been with the trade organizations for I don't know how many years, but at least a couple of decades, I'd say, which is unbelievable when you see her still being so young and unbeaten by the industry. And Anna, if you are with me, I can't see you on the screen, but if you're with me, I would like to ask you a little about the role of the bus and coach industry when it comes to sustainability. Because during the last 5 or 10 years, the bus and coach industry in Sweden has changed dramatically. And in public transport today in Sweden, approximately 90% of the buses operating are running on fossil-free fuel. What are the main factors behind this, and how do you see the future development of the fossil-free role and the environmental role of the bus, and also what obstacles do you see in the future?
Hi everyone, and hi Ulo. Thank you for letting me be part of this event and the webinar. And just as Ulo pointed out, the Swedish bus and coach sector leads the transition to climate-friendly transport sector. Ulo mentioned the figure 90%. That's true in the tendered traffic, and overall the bus and coach sector in Sweden today to 85% runs on fossil-free fuels. We lead the shift, and we're very proud of that. But according to your question, Ulo, we have a few challenges, and they are huge, I would say. The biggest one is, as you pointed out, the European Commission at the moment. In Sweden and Finland, we use biofuels to a big extent, and we have managed to reach the goal for a climate-friendly transport sector due to the use of biofuels. However, the ongoing discussions within the European Union and the proposals that now are discussed in the frame of Fit for 55 package has, and I'm very afraid they will, put us on the back towards not the future, but the history. Because if the European Commission continues its attitude towards biofuels, we will have to go back to fossil fuels again. There is no other option at the moment. We do have electric buses, and the PTAs in Sweden are introducing them, especially in city traffic. But for long distance coaches, for commercial traffic, for tourist coaches, for example, there will be a few years before we can run them on electricity. We also have the energy crisis with the huge prices running up, so we don't know really where we're going, and the electricity has to be green as well. So I often wonder, why do the European Commission want to do our path so difficult? We have shown in Sweden and Finland that we can do the shift. Why don't follow us instead of making it troublesome?
But you said you are quite pessimistic or quite worried. How do the Swedish or Nordic governments act in this matter?
It's difficult to see. So far, I think the Swedish government, and also the Finnish one especially, has been quite ambitious. They have managed to push the decisions 1 year ahead for every year. And because if you only look for the proposals from European Commission's over the last years, they have wanted to put a stop for the biofuels long time ago, I would say. But so far, the Swedish and the Finnish government has done quite well. Today, I'm a bit more negative and more worried because the signals, at least from the Swedish government at the moment, is that they think they have lost the end point. They are now starting to prepare for Swedish legislations and proposals that will go in the direction that the European Commission points, and sort of abandon the biofuels that we know works and that the bus and coach industry in Sweden and Finland so successfully have used for their climate and shift.
Thank you, Anna. I'd like to go to another actually sector of the bus and coach industry that is a little bit unexpected, I would say. I'd like to introduce Frida Christensen. She is with Telia in Sweden, which is one of the major telecom companies in the Nordic countries. And it's a little bit surprising, of course, for some people to hear what has a telecom company to contribute to public transport and the bus and coach industry. And I think it's a lot because Frida has a background in the public transport sector and both at the PTA and the operator side. And the first thing that comes to my mind when we talk about Telia and public transport is a project that part in Sweden. It's called 5G Ride. But I understand that Telia is involved in much more when it comes to public transport and buses. So Frida, I would like to ask you, how can you contribute like Telia? How can a company like Telia contribute to a switch to alternative drives, and how important are these issues for your company and the services you provide?
Thank you for being here. And I'm presenting Telia, and we do such more than the connectivity for the public transport industry. And what we are doing is to help our customers to have the correct data in right time. And there we work with the input back to the drivers all the time. We have been working with eco driving for a long time. Even if depending on what kind of resources that is used, we need to reduce the resources we are using, even if it's free fossil or electricity. And that's what we're doing daily in the Nordic countries for our PTAs and PTOs. So that's something we do, but also, as Anna mentioned, there have been a big introduce of electrical vehicles in the cities of Scandinavia and Nordic countries, and that needs to have even more information from the vehicles. We need to know exactly where the vehicle is every second, because the planning of a traffic with electricity is a different way comparing what we have done before. So there, Telia have a huge role to handle all this data and have the connectivity to provide the data to the different resources that needed it to have the right information in the right time. And then we also work to see where people are in the countries to be able to have the right traffic and city planning to avoid we would like to have more greener cities, and then we need to provide the customer with the right bus lanes so people can take the bus instead of the car, and we can have the right lines so it doesn't have much impact on the city center and the region.
I also understand that you have helped at least one of the main operators in Scandinavia with mapping like people's movements and comparing it to the actual routes and timetables. And one of the results was that actually people don't exactly behave like the planners have expected them to.
No, and that's something we have. We have more data now to be able to be working with improvements more continuously. And the traffic, normally we have a timetable for the summer and one for the winter, but that's not really how the passengers are traveling during the year. We would like to have green cities and people, we would like to have the people to take the bike when it's possible and the bus when it's needed and car when it's really needed. So that's what we are doing and help our customer to have the correct data to be able to plan the traffic in city centers.
Right. Thank you. We'll get back to you later on during this show. Now I'd like to turn to Norway, actually, to Padram Nadim, who is the project manager for energy systems at Ruter. And Ruter is the PTA for the Oslo region, the Oslo and Akershus, and by far the largest PTA in Norway. And one of the interesting things with Ruter is that Oslo and Ruter has been definitely in the forefront when it comes to electrification of public transport in Scandinavia, electrification of buses, and also has some extensive experience of fuel cell buses. I think you have got rid of those now, but could you share a little about your experiences, about the background, the experiences and the future plans when it comes to these matters?
That's right. Thank you, Ulo. So Ruter has been working for quite some time with different ambitious environmental and climate goals. I think it started in the beginning of last decade. We stated that all public transport in Oslo should be fossil free. So Ruter is the PTA. We operate the buses, trams, ferries, and metro in Oslo. And our buses and ferries were currently using fossil fuels. But then we were well on our way to reaching our goal of being completely fossil free using biofuels and also some zero emission fuels. But what we experienced in 2020 was that the Norwegian national regulations changed so that we could no longer actually state that we were cutting climate emissions by using biofuels in our buses. Due to how the biofuel market in Norway is regulated, and that was actually a paradox. We had to go back to using fossil fuels on our biodiesel-driven buses. But we're currently mostly working on our ambition of becoming zero emission by year 2028. We are well on our way. We have currently around 200 electric buses in our fleet, and we will expect that all the city buses inside the city of Oslo will be zero emission, mostly electric buses by year 2023. And we also have two of our largest ferry lines are now with electric ferries. So the electrification is going quite steadily ahead. We're now seeing that if it's not currently the case that the electric buses are more cost efficient for a 10-year contract than diesel alternative, we expect that to happen within a very short time. So we will also see that the transition to zero emission as a way to become more cost efficient and also get many other benefits from more silent zero emission traffic. And also, so our story with zero emission started, as you said, with a trial of fuel cell buses. That we had 5 fuel cell buses with a local hydrogen station producing fuel for the buses in 2012. We trialed the buses for around 8 years, so we ended the trial last year in year 2020. What we experienced there was that we were maybe a bit early with trying the technology. There were, I mean, the buses would work quite well for operating routes when we had regular maintenance. But since this was such an early stage of technology, whenever we would have a single technical problem with our refueling station, we would have to park the buses, wait for new parts from a supplier in the other side of the world. So we experienced a lot of downtime during the trials, and that's maybe the nature of testing new technology. Since we didn't have any other alternative way to fuel the buses either, there was no way to put them on the road. So this is quite a shaky experience testing the fuel cell buses, but we do. We've made other attempts now at introducing fuel cell buses in our fleet, and we believe that the technology is mature, but since there's still not a big fueling infrastructure for hydrogen, the cost is still too high compared to the electric zero-emission alternative.
But when you see upon the energy efficiency of fuel cell buses, are they efficient?
Well, that's actually an interesting case for Nordics. The electric buses are in summer weather. The electric buses are far more efficient. But what we see in the colder winter months is that in an electric bus you need around 50-60% of your energy goes to heating the bus. Since you're operating cold temperature, you're opening the doors a lot. You lose a lot of heat. So so if you want to say that you're driving completely zero emission, no diesel heater on board, you actually need to use quite a lot of your battery capacity to heat the bus. So in that way, in a fuel cell bus, you get spill heat from the fuel cell that you can use for heating the bus, and the consumption is. There's less variation in consumption between summer and winter, and also what we see is that the driving style of the bus driver is a large factor in a battery electric bus, but it's not that significant in a fuel cell bus, so it's easier to plan. But what we see now is currently the battery electric bus alternative is by far the most cost efficient in the city routes, and we're now kind of exploring what will be the best technology for our longer distance regional bus routes.
Thank you. Quite interesting, I must say. Now let's turn to Finland. We have two panelists from Finland, and I'd like to start with a company called WIM, or actually the company is called Maas Global, but the product is WIM. Jarkko Jaakkola is area manager for the Nordic countries and the Baltic countries at this company, and mobility as a service has been quite a buzzword for some years now in the public transport industry. What I would like to know, Jarkko, is to what extent has it up until now influenced and changed the sector? And how do you think it has contributed to cleaner cities and more sustainable transport?
Greetings to all viewers online, and thanks for organizers for the invitation. To answer your question, Ulo, it has helped in the sense that more and more public transport and other mobility providers have or are currently developing an API to make the mobility as a service possible. API is the digital interface which makes the ticket purchases and requests for a timetable between the computers, for example, possible. So in that sense, it has changed the public transport sector already, and will continue to change it. Some of these APIs still have some issues, but the situation is getting better all the time. But even though public transport providers have and are developing APIs to make these purchases possible, there are still problems with the financial terms in some areas, and these change actually a lot from one area to another, or even within the countries. We do have to remember that a third party, such as a mobility as a service operator, is taking care of the credit card transaction costs on behalf of the public transport service providers and other providers as well. And these can vary from 1% to 5%, and even more if European credit cards are actually used. So these costs should be covered at a bare minimum level to the parties who purchase these tickets via these APIs and offer them to the consumers. Otherwise, it's actually a loss-making machine, and companies would not be interested in it, which will actually stall the development. In here, there's still some work to be done in some areas. But when we are actually combining, for example, long-distance coaches and public transportation and making travel chains using these modes, that's definitely where the mobility as a service operators can help to make the customer's life a lot easier and push people to use these transport mode instead of their own cars, which we are definitely trying to avoid.
But do you have any figures that shows that this concept mobility as a service actually reduces the usage of private cars, for instance?
We have actually done a survey among our customers, and we got a close to 400 response. Out of the customers who currently had a car, a staggering 48% said that it is very unlikely that they will buy another car in the future, and additional 16% said it to be unlikely. On top of that, 12.5% of our customers said that our WIM application has helped them to get rid of their car, or that they were able to avoid buying a new car. So I would say that those are really good results and show that the mobility as a service can really work and has made an impact already.
That's indeed impressive figures at this early stage. But what's your forecast? How much will it reduce car transportation, private car usage in a 10-year period?
That is, of course, a good question, and the crystal ball would be extremely nice to have. But there is the government actually did order a report from Bramble, the consultancy company, to investigate the potential of a mobility as a service as a concept on decreasing the CO2 emissions. It didn't take into account that how many cars it would reduce, but just evaluate how much emissions can we reduce. The result of their investigation was that in Helsinki by 2030, the mobility as a service can reduce CO2 emissions by up to 260 to 300,000 tons. And by 2045, the reduction was estimated to be 580,000 tons. So I would say that's another proof that mobility as a service can have a real impact and real potential.
That's very interesting. Now let's stay in Finland, and I'd like to turn to Harri Santamala, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Sensible4. It's a company that maybe not everybody has heard of, but it's an interesting company because they are working with self-driving vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and automation of vehicles. And one of the problems, one of the challenges with self-driving vehicles is the external effects, like if you have a snowstorm, how will it react and so on. So Harri, I would like to ask you, you've been working for several years now with autonomous vehicles, autonomous buses, but can you expand a little on how these kinds of vehicles can contribute to cleaner public transport?
Well, that's a very good question. And actually, the technology itself, or the technology of autonomous driving, it's a little bit like sword with two edges. So on one side, the technology has a potential to automate all the private vehicles, making them sort of improving them to a next level, and in the worst case, making them even drive by themselves. So basically, you can imagine that everybody would have their own vehicle with a personal driver available all the time. And that kind of future doesn't sound sustainable or cleaner. But the other direction where we are also focused in is that actually through the technology, we can bring new forms of public transportation solutions to the market. So which could then enhance the public transportation and make it more appealing, and as a sort of generational change, reduce the private car ownership. So that's really at the end of the day the impact we are aiming for.
Right, and I'd like to continue with you now, actually. So we'll gradually go over to the next cluster of questions, because we all know that the pandemic has had a huge effect on the public transport industry, and in many places cars have taken over from public transport because people, when they travel, prefer to go alone. Could you what are your reflections on this matter, and will increased automation and driverless buses make public transport more attractive from this point of view?
If we sort of consider the pandemic, the impact indeed to the public transportation has been huge, as already discussed here, and I think sort of that there's immediate solution coming through the technologies is of course answering to the availability of the drivers. So if that's an issue, this is something which the technology can address, and also like the traditional way to think about the sort of mass transportation is that if you have a bigger bus or bigger train, you have more capacity to move people. But through the automation, actually, this doesn't necessarily apply anymore. We can look into smaller and different sizes of units, but still maintain a low running cost of those units due to using the technology for driving those. So what the self-driving technology can do to sort of bring in the confidence on using the public transportation, it can introduce new varieties and introduce smaller units when necessary, as well as answering the problem of availability of the drivers. And even more when we start to scale back up to the normal, that's going to be really critical time to find a ways how we can sort of rebuild the sort of bus and public transportation lines as much as possible in meeting the demand of the users in the coming years.
In connection with this, somebody obviously has read the magazine that I publish and asks a question that says driverless buses for corona-safe public transport was a story we had. It's a project called CabbyBus, where all passengers travel in their own cabin in this vehicle. Do you think that self-driving electric buses where all like 6 passengers have their own compartment is part of the solution for this?
I think it could be. I mean, how I see future of shared mobility is that we are going to have big buses and we are going to have big trains and we are going to need those. But then we have much more flexibility in scaling down, and whether I'm not sure what's the sort of right size of cabin, but certainly the sort of limitations coming from the cost side are going to sort of the equation is changing, which would allow us to reduce the size, and that's really like the whole essence of providing something more flexible and scalable.
Right. I'd like to, since we get some questions from our viewers, I'd like to turn to Padram here. There's a question concerning electric vehicles, electric buses. And the question is, there is growing interest in the electric trolley bus, battery bus hybrid model. We see it all over Europe. Where you can run part of the line under the catenary and the rest of the line on battery. Do you think there's a market in the Nordic countries for that? Well, is that a solution that Oslo might consider?
Well, historically, Oslo has had trolley buses in the 50s and the 60s. But the catenaries were unfortunately taken down after some time, and we've looked into the possibility of using a catenary for electric buses. I think currently this depends on the route and the demands, how intensely you want to run your routes. But we see in the city of Bergen, the second largest city in Norway, they now ordered new trolley buses with a battery on board, which makes it easy for them to drive through the historical city center without having infrastructure there. And I think with recent trolley technology, you can drive, you only need 1/3 of your route with the catenary. So that makes it definitely easier than it was a few years ago. But all of this comes down to, costs doing the detailed calculations for your bus routes, for your bus contracts, your depot management, looking at what energy you have available where. We've done several approaches looking at different charging strategies, looking at different fuels. It comes down to basically what the needs of your passenger is in the geographical area where you are, but we definitely see a potential for more catenary and trolley buses if you can get the politicians to allow you to build the infrastructure needed.
Quite interesting. And now let's stay in Oslo. Padram, could you share with us the Oslo and the Norwegian experience of the effects of the pandemic on the public transport, especially since I understand that Ruter has warned that there might be significant cuts in the services ahead.
That's right. We are, interestingly enough, I was a moderator on Tuesday in a seminar at the Polytechnical Society of Oslo, where we had some researchers who had very fresh research in the traveling habits of the people in the Oslo region during the pandemic. What we see is that we're sort of realizing now that we will not reach the amount of passengers that we had before the pandemic in the short future. When we had the period before the last Omicron virus hit Norway, we had about 2 months without major restrictions. And at that time, we were up at 80% of our pre-pandemic passenger levels. And that it's a big challenge because for us as a PTA, we rely 50% of our income comes from tickets from the passengers, the other 50% funding from the municipality around Oslo. So that either we need to get more secure funding from the municipality, which is an issue because they will have to prioritize from other areas, schools, senior care, etc. Or we will have to find a way to increase prices. That could be, it's not very popular to do that. Or also find new ticketing models is something we're exploring now. So Ruter launched a new app half a year ago during the pandemic, and we're using that as a platform to test new ways of new services and new ticketing fares and trialing how we can bring back our passengers.
May I turn to Anna Grönlund from the Swedish Bus and Coach Federation then, now that we're talking about the pandemic. And as I said earlier, like everybody else, the bus and coach industry in Sweden and the Nordic countries as a whole has taken quite a beating during the pandemic. How would you like to summarize the experiences of the industry so far, and how will you work to minimize the negative long-term effects of it?
You talked about a crystal ball before. If I had the correct answer to your question, I would be a prize winner of some sort. But the effects on the Swedish bus and coach sector, a lot of people, also the authorities organization, talks about that we have to somehow meet a decreased travel pattern in the public transport with about, some say 20, some say 10 degrees. But on the other hand, we see at the same time that people seem to want to travel more on their spare time. They want to, at least they say, they want to go for more travels. They would use their free time and weekends for traveling, especially in Europe. So we might see a changed pattern totally. And there I would like to copy the foreign speaker. We have to develop new ticketing and payment system for the public transport. That is very essential, very important. because we want to meet our travelers on terms and conditions that attracts them. So we can't have a ticketing system that is modeled for the 60s actually in Sweden to meet today's demands. That's very crucial, and I know that almost every PTA in Sweden is discussing this at the moment, also developing different systems and trying pilots everywhere. And that's very promising, I would say. The other thing that we need to address, and I would say we have a golden opportunity right now, is to take a big gap for the infrastructure, because when the public transport, of course, as every other service, is about attractiveness. And if we can make the public transport and the bus transport as attractive that people want to travel, there is more efficient to travel with the public transport than by your own car, then people will choose the public transport. That's natural. People do rational decisions, especially if they know them and have tested them. So if we can make the public transport system for ticketing and payment attractive and tailor-made for today's demand, and also develop an infrastructure that make the bus goes fast, efficient, and everything else like BRT or separate bus lanes, then I think we will have our travelers back if they travel on regular office hours or working hours, or if they travel more in the afternoons and in the weekends. Well, that's sort of that we will see.
That is quite interesting, and will this also open up for new ways of looking upon travel from people? I'd like to turn to Jarkko again, and mobility as a service, can it in a way help the public transport and the bus industry to recover?
Firstly, when we look at our customers, most of them actually use public transportation already because it is so easy to use and convenient. And when we look at what transport modes are combined on our app, most likely our customers are actually combining public transportation with bicycles and e-scooters. So they're using the bicycles and e-scooters for the last and first mile solutions. Also, when looking at where our customers combine 2 or more modes, in over 70% of the customers' trips, they use the combination of public transportation, bicycles and e-scooters. So I would actually say that this is a really good result and proving the potential that we have over here. And we do still believe that the well-functioning public transportation should be the backbone of every mass operators, not just ours, but everyone else as well. Anna also mentioned the attractiveness of the public transportation and the coaches and the buses. I would say that the problem still today is that the timetables and ticket purchases are a little bit scattered. So if you are making a little bit longer trip and you might have to connect, for example, public transportation and the coaches, the user would have to plan their routes and their timetables in 2 or more different web pages or apps with totally different user interfaces, which might also have different logic. Some of them might require pre-purchases. Some of them might say that, okay, you have to pay to the driver and so on. So the user is actually quite confused. So basically being able to provide them with an easy one-stop shop to make their travel arrangements and travel change easily, and allowing them to see that it is actually quite easy, traveling is quite fast without the extra hassle, and that people can actually work during their travel if they take a long distance bus or coach compared to their own car. This clearly has potential on our mind to convince people to change their behavior more towards the public transportation, buses and coaches, and away from their own cars. So definitely there is clear potential.
That sounds very, very, very positive. May I just add that at least on my screen, your image has frozen. So maybe you should restart your camera while I turn to Frida Christensen from Telia, the telecom company. Frida, your company is not directly involved in operating public transport today, But I'd like to know, since you're kind of involved in an indirect way, has the pandemic raised questions and issues that you will have to take into consideration when it comes to develop your projects? And especially if you could say something about this 5G ride, which is a future project where you're involved with the Keolis and a lot of other actors. Are there any unique safety features that you're developing now?
Yeah, as we have discussed a lot this session, is that people's behavior have changed, and that's something during the pandemic, and that's something that Telia have had a unique position in Sweden during this year, where we have delivered anonymized aggregate data to the authorities all the time to be aware about where people are traveling, so the PTAs can take decisions about how they should change informations to the passenger and so on. But what we also do, we have, like for our vehicle systems that we have live together today with Nubina as a big operator, but also with the PTAs, is that we have seen that automatic passenger counting, the need of that have increased during this year. There's more need to be aware about how many people is on the bus right now, and especially in Finland. And there we also have the organization in IT4PT, IT for Public Transport, that driven the standardizations about that. And that there we have seen huge differences during the pandemic to be able to serve the passengers with the right information. But also when it comes to safety, to have the passenger, we have been into ticketing systems today, and Telia is also delivering systems in Sweden. And what we have done, that we have Siemens system, and we also launched during last year Apple Pay. So you as a passenger doesn't even have, you can travel contactless. You doesn't have to take your phone up. You doesn't have to take your card. You can have your phone in your pocket or your Apple Watch on the arm and travel. So it doesn't have to be crowded, and it doesn't have to be unsafe when you're on board a vehicle.
That's very interesting. Have you any figures that could show some more light on how much passengers use these services like passenger counting? Because I know that some PTAs you can go into their app or to the website and say, this departure is probably very crowded, so I can take the next one. But do people really use it?
I think people using it, we still have quite a lack of data due to the PTA I think it's the traffic areas that started at least 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Then it was demanded to have an automatic passenger counter. So we still have a lot of vehicles out in the industry that not have this information on board. And Finland have taken a huge step during the last year, and that's something that is demanded for all new traffic areas that's ongoing. So I think that the data and the information to the passenger will be better all the time, but they're still lacking. And we also have customers to Telia that's using the ticketing system to inform the customer about if it's crowded on the bus or not. But everything comes to the data, and that has been good to provide the customer with a good service.
Well, I'll stay with you and we'll gradually move on to the next cluster of questions. I don't know how much you are specialized in this project 5G ride that I'm so fascinated about, that Telia is a partner of. When I first encountered it, must have been September 2019. It was in Stockholm, and you put Prince Daniel, the husband of our Crown Princess Victoria, in this 5G ride vehicle, and off he went without the driver behind the wheel. So I think, my God, this is exciting. But when I met him after the ride, he had a broad smile on his face, and he said this was groovy. But how groovy is it? Do you think this technology will change mobility in cities in the future and also city planning?
Great that you was there. It's a fantastic project, and yes, this will change the traveling in the city, but also regional. The ground key, as I have mentioned, is to know where people are, so we have the right service where it's needed. And then I think what we are working from Telia's side a lot is to have the sensors on the vehicle, the sensors in the road, and sensor around the vehicle, and have the network to provide all this data that is needed to have these services in place. So I think the technology is one thing, and the other thing is to know about where people are traveling, so we can build the right services. So yes, it will be a change. That's my point of view.
How long will it take till us ordinary travelers really see this change?
I think we will come back to what we have discussed when Anna mentioned the bus rapid line, special bus lines, because I don't think we can put autonomous vehicles into the traffic right now. But if we get special infrastructure so that they will have lines, I think we will have it in quite near future.
Right, and this naturally takes us over to Harry. And since you're working with autonomy and autonomous vehicles, how do you think this will change mobility in rural? I'm not talking about cities, but rural, sparsely populated areas in the future that are difficult to service with traditional public transport.
Well, that's a good question. If we first start from the technology perspective, so the biggest sort of obstacle to autonomous driving, or biggest challenge, is the human in the traffic. We are very good on sort of bending and a little bit breaking the traffic rules, which is something that is can be very difficult for the machine to interpret in a right way, because the machines don't understand like a causal consequences in the same way as we humans do. So when you go to a rural place, the equation changes completely for the technology. You can basically assume that if you are in a northern Lapland, that if you see anything human or animal, it's you can just like slow down or stop. So it's not like an urban environment. So what point I'm trying to make here is that looking from the technology perspective, we see that there's a lot of use cases coming to sort of non-urban areas with less population density, and what we can do is that we can rethink the public transportation in those areas, and we can start looking into more just on-demand based mobility, that the person wants to go at certain point from point A to point B, and maybe we have some kind of bus ride-hailing setups in case there's other people moving to this same direction, and that this kind of offering could offer something which we currently just cannot do due to the high cost of the operation.
That's interesting, and this brings me over to Jarkko, because this interconnects actually with mobility as a system and solving these issues. How would you say that mobility as a system will change people's quality of life, city planning, and also will it affect people living in rural areas?
Well, since we are actually trying to answer a seemingly rather question, which is that what would it take for you to give up your car? It seems easy question, but it varies from all of the participants here. They have different lives, situations, different needs. Some might live downtown, someone might live in the rural areas. So we are trying to actually make their life easier without the hassles of owning the car. You have to change the winter tires, summer tires, surprise cost when something breaks down, and even trying to find a parking place, which actually takes quite a long, especially in downtown areas. So we're trying to make their life easier and better in that sense. No single transport service provider can do this alone, because one provider's offering don't really cover all of the customers' traveling needs. So if we can actually help get people to rid of their cars, we are actually releasing a lot of their funds to be used within different mobility services. We have to remember that purchasing a car is the second biggest investment in anyone's lives, just after the housing. And it's actually clearly the worst one because it is usually losing their value. So, but like I said, that we can't actually do it alone. No one can. It is a huge industry in a way, and we can't also dictate government policies, tax regulations, city parking rules and costs, which all have a huge impact on people's traveling behavior. Actually, we need all parties' actions here. We need the stick and we need the carrot. But to be honest, a normal company cannot offer the customers the stick, otherwise there will be no customers left. So, but the biggest and the most difficult question is that all of these actions should be aligned and timed correctly between the cities, the public transportation, and the companies, because you shouldn't give the stick too early until the services are available, and vice versa. So actually city planning and should be keeping the transport servicification in mind, because when we are looking at city and when they're developing a new residential area, for example, it takes a couple of years. And now we are actually in a situation where the world might look different by then. The industry is changing faster ever than when the car was invented. So when you start looking at the malls or railway stations and stuff, places like this, there aren't really places where you can actually use autonomous cars or taxi services or buses to drop off and hop on into quite conveniently. At least whenever I look at it, then they're usually, for example, if you order a taxi into a mall, it's somewhere hidden in the garage, and you might be in the wrong section of the garage where the taxi is, or especially when we are looking at when the autonomous cars comes in. So it should be quite designated area where those drop-offs and hop-ins would happen. Otherwise, we are left in a situation where these things happen in a bus stop, and that's not a really good answer either. So basically, we are looking some progress here. For example, some malls have developed those kind of a pre-designated areas where you can leave the scooters or city bikes or shared bikes. So we are going into the right direction. But when we're looking at especially the autonomous cars, we do have a couple of years before they are, we have a couple of years times to make those drop off and hop in places available. So I'm looking harder here to develop those.
Right. Talking about changing cities, I'd like to turn to Padram in Oslo and Ruter and this rapid electrification that the bus services in the Oslo region are going through. What are the impacts on the city? How are you changing the city? Will Oslo be a different city in the future thanks to this?
Well, I would say it's a bold statement to make that it will be a radically different city due to the electrification. But what we see is also with a very high penetration of private electric cars we see in Oslo. While we 5 to 10 years ago, we had severe problems with air quality during winter. We even had some days where diesel cars were banned inside the city due to bad air quality. We never reached those pollution levels again. So already we can see an improvement in the air quality. Electric buses also offer, at least in the city where they drive slowly, a much more comfortable, less intrusive noises. There is tire noise from the zero emission buses, but that's usually not that noticeable inside the city streets. Well, how it's what we also see now is that we started off in 2018 trialing 6 electric buses. In our most recent tender, we ordered 180 electric buses. So we're now introducing very large fleets of buses with large batteries. And we can see now that we might even be a player in the electricity market. When you have such a large amount of battery energy storage at one place, we can start discussing with the grid operator how to help them with doing balancing services for the power grid. Yeah, we're introducing a lot of new elements that we're just starting to explore. basically. Also, the bus sector, I will have to say that the bus sector is the first heavy-duty vehicle, the bus, to be electrified. We're now seeing that slowly electric heavy-duty trucks are being introduced. The charging infrastructure is not yet ready for them. So we're trying to see like how can we share the high power charging infrastructure for buses with other sectors, such as heavy duty trucks or maybe garbage trucks, other municipal vehicles.
So there are fascinating perspectives opening up actually for the future of buses. Anna Grönlund from the Swedish Bus and Coach Federation, if you put yourself in a bus operator's position, how do you see the development of smart cities, connected cities, etc., and the role of electrification? Anna seems to
I would say that we already see how our member companies has taken their first and very ambitious step on this path. Many of our member companies has developed their own services for this. They offer services to the PTAs in order to take care of the solutions for the integrated mobility and the ticketing and route planning, also towards the passengers. So I think many of our companies are well ahead and well equipped for this development. Of course, it's easier for bigger bus and coach companies to do so. They have the muscles and the resources. For smaller companies, it's much more difficult. But I would like to introduce for the European audience the very Swedish good example, I think, in this matter, and that's a company called Samtrafiken. I know there is similar organizations within the other Nordic countries, but in Sweden we have a joint cooperation between the PTAs and the PTOs, and they have developed for several years ago, actually. I think they are celebrating some kind of anniversary this year. A joint service for passengers and for the PTAs and PTOs, where you can buy and you can plan your route towards Sweden in different modes and different companies and different PTAs. And they have developed a quite advanced IT system behind this. And this has all done, it's a free development from the PTAs and the PTOs, and now we are looking ahead on we had a Swedish governmental survey study for some years ago, and now we are looking forward to see if there will be a legislation that sort of regulates the services and the organization that Samtrafiken already has built up, I would say, in Sweden.
Mm. You have an international perspective. You're active in the IRU and the UITP and different organizations for the industry. Very briefly, where do you find the world's best bus concepts?
I haven't been all around the world. I haven't been to South America, for example, so I haven't seen those bus and coach systems that they have there. But as far as I've visited, I would say that the France system, Metz, is one of my favorite. They have managed to build a system that is easy to understand. It's attractive. They combined a very easy ticketing system with a very tailor-made infrastructure. You see those fantastic buses running all over the street, and they have sort of rebuilt the city. It's an old city, an old France city, after the bus and coach system. I think it's tremendous.
Right. Do you think somebody suggested that we should maybe have a competition, a European-wide competition of the best bus systems? Is that something that the Swedish Bus and Coach Federation will support?
Yes, we would. We have some good example in Sweden as well. We have the Malmö Expressen in Malmö in the southern parts of Sweden. We have good examples in Stockholm with Barkarby. We have in Karlstad. We have other several cities, but we haven't reached the potential that the France example shows us. And as many already have said, it's difficult to compare European systems with our old cities and sort of very developed traffic regulations with the systems that you can build in countries in, for example, Africa or South America, where you can start more from scratch and more sort of adjust the city life to the bus and coach sector more easily, I think.
Right, and since we still have you here, I'd like to talk a little briefly, because our time is running, but briefly about what is your view on investments in infrastructure made for buses and coaches in Sweden, also compared to rail? How are long distance coaches and commercial services treated versus the publicly financed bus operations?
If I just have one word, I would say bad. I think the investment and the resources for the bus and coach sector as a whole is you can wish a lot more of that. And compared to the train sector, the bus and coach sector has a big gap. That's also, it demands both for the infrastructure, but also for the services itself. But, and I would say that the flexibility of the bus and coach is one of our strengths, but also in this matter, it's one of the aspects that public planners often use as an argument for not making a dedicated infrastructure for the bus and coaches. And for the commercial sectors, we have some good examples from some regions or PTAs in Sweden where you have a good cooperation, where the authorities see the potential of using and combining commercial traffic with publicly funded public service, where the passengers get sort of the best of the both sort of regimes. But we also have seen and still see examples where the commercial traffic, like express buses or other types of modes, are treated very, very badly. They can't even reach the terminals and stations. Their passengers has to stand out aside a heavily traffic road, etc., etc.
Right. Pedram, going to Oslo, what do you think is needed further from to develop the industry? Is this something that the PTAs can manage by themselves and maybe together with large operators, or do you need new partnerships in the industry, for instance, with startups?
Well, I would say we need both. we need everything, basically, because. We actually established a own team that we call the Radical Innovation Team. That is Router's team who will kind of look into the future mobility solutions, and they run some of our pilots. We have one trial of autonomous minibuses with Hadi's team in Sensible 4. We also trial electric scooters as part of our system and in the more rural regions in our system. And we're also looking into could perhaps the buses be combined with package delivery? Is there potential? We believe there might be a potential there because we do run large buses many parts of the day, and outside rush hours there's a lot of empty space in the buses, so exploring those kinds of opportunities is the PTAs need to be looking ahead, because what we see now is that there is a lot of disruption coming, new possibilities from 5G, electrification, new technology, and the PTAs, if they want to have an important role in the future of our cities, we also need to follow the technological developments and go into partnerships with startups is one way to do that. We think they have a possibility to be more agile than we do as a large publicly owned entity.
Jarkko, how do you see the role of startups in the public transport sector? Do they really contribute to the development of the sector? Do you have any examples of how startups have changed the industry?
Well, I definitely do believe in it. Otherwise, there would be no sense for me to be here, would there? Yeah. The benefit that the startups have is that they can rather easily develop and try out something new quite fast. Startups also have the possibility to help and contribute to solving an issue which, for example, the public transportation might have, and therefore actually reduce the costs. For example, if public transportation sees that in some areas the occupancy level might be really low, could startups work together with public transportation to offer some alternative ways to transport people in these areas? Also, different micro-mobility services and city bikes can help in the last mile solutions, like I mentioned earlier. With our data shows that our customers have combined these modes quite a lot. So it could be possible to reduce or even shorter some routes or bus lines, for example, and cover those with other modes, and therefore reduce costs, since we all know that buses are quite expensive and to have and run, especially if they are empty. What I've also said to our partners is that startups can also be a convenient and very cost-effective way to try out new things with the public transportation and others even, without even a long and costly development or even a long-term decision. So if it works, then changes can be made for longer terms, and startups can be used to try out the new pricing models, for example. That's without destroying the customers or their own price perceptions. So that's a really good thing, that you can try out something. If it works, then you can take it into use for long term. And if it doesn't, we still learn something and the price point isn't destroyed by themselves. And I also like to say that if you don't try, you're not going to learn anything. I have stated also that you can ask your questions from your customers, definitely, but they might not give you an actual answer how they will develop or how they will travel, because they might be reflecting the answer on the current ways they do it. And I don't think that many people can envision their travel and mobility needs for the future accurately, especially if you're asking them an opinion on something that doesn't really exist yet. So it might actually direct you in the wrong direction. One last note is an example is that here in Helsinki, we actually created a 10-ticket bundle for the customers, which isn't offered by the public transportation, which is actually selling quite nicely here. We realized that due to the pandemic, people are actually not commuting to the office as much, so the 30-day ticket might be a bit too long or a bit too much. And basically also customers or the companies have stated that they might continue this hybrid model or hybrid working model in the future as well. So that's another example where we see that, okay, these startups can actually help.
That's quite interesting. Harry, how do you see your company working ahead? Will you need new partnerships? Will you need new resources to proceed? And not least, of course, are there huge investments needed for you to go ahead and really be a part in everyday operations of autonomous bus services?
In short, yes and no, but in more detail, there's 3 ways to achieve autonomously driving products. One way is that you have a gazillion of money, a lot of patience, and you go to the holy grail of robotaxi. Invest billions of money now, and maybe in a 5 or 10 years time, you have a solution that works everywhere all the time. Second option is thinking the old-fashioned way of the auto industry. Let's develop driver assistance solutions and slowly, gradually increase the autonomy of the vehicle. So this is a model which would be aiming for private vehicle mostly. And the third way to do it, and this is what we are doing, is that we are not trying to conquer the world at once. We are focusing on sort of incremental sort of development of the product, incrementally extending the product features and capabilities, starting from those low-hanging fruits, but focused on safety and reliability, and then extending the product capabilities, meaning that we can offer more and more services in different type of areas when the sort of years goes on. And yeah, finally the sort of, I think this kind of new disruptive industry, it's all about the partnerships. So we are not going to do it alone. Nobody is going to do it alone. We need the whole value chain and to form partnerships like we have in Norway with Router, where we have a partnership with Toyota, who is obviously the vehicle manufacturer, Router as the PTA, and then we have a PT operator, Holo, and Sensible Force software company, and we are all aiming towards the same goal. And these are exactly the same kind of or type of partnerships that are needed to create and establish the new disruptive solutions to the market.
Right. We all need partners, you say, and one of the partners is that is involved in the industry is Telia. Frida, very briefly, what investments are needed to achieve fully autonomous bus services, do you think? And also when it comes to the physical infrastructure for public transport and for buses?
Yes, we have mentioned 5G ride that had been done in Stockholm, and 5G is something that will be needed due to have all this data that is needed from the vehicle. And there Telia has a big knowledge about being out in the vehicle for public transportation already to collect a lot of data from the vehicles, and we also have the network. And there's is huge investments doing right now, especially in the Nordic countries, to have the 5G net in place. But as I also mentioned, I think we need also to focus more around what's happening in the cities more than only at the vehicle, to have the sensor to provide the correct information, to have possibility to remove obstacles and risk in the road space before the autonomous vehicle will be there, so we can have a service that will run smoothly. So I think there Telia has a position to have the sensors both on the vehicle but also in the city.
Right. Let's see. We have some time, I think, for questions from our viewers. There's one question here. Are there any discussions in the Nordic countries on public transport for free for the customers? Maybe we could ask, how's the situation in Oslo? Is there a pressure that people can ride for free?
Well, there is. It's a very attractive proposal for public transport fans to travel for free, but actually, Router's mandate is not to promote as many public transport trips as possible. Our mandate given to us by our municipality is that Router should promote the inhabitants of our region to walk, bike first and foremost, and if the alternative then is to use public transport, our mission is to convert car users to public transport users or become pedestrians or bikers. So the dilemma of introducing free public transport is that you will have many people traveling unnecessary trips. And our mission is to promote sustainable freedom of movement, which means that when you need to make a trip, you want to move as sustainable as possible, but you don't want to be mobile if you don't really need to be mobile. In that sense, the home office is a positive because you can do your meetings without moving outside your home. You don't need to travel internationally necessarily to have a meeting. So we reduce the amount of unnecessary trips, which is also an important mission. So I would say it's there have been some trials of very reduced fares in Norway, and what usually happens is that the buses become so crammed that it's uncomfortable for the passengers. It's hard to scale up the system to take away all those passengers.
Right. Anna Grönlund, I would like to put the next viewer question to you, and that is, how successful has common ticketing been between public and private operators, and can this ensure that there are common standards of comfort, cleanliness and efficiency?
It's quite difficult to do a general conclusion for that question, but I would say that we have some good examples on private and public ticketing system that's integrated. We have one of the most or best well-known in Sweden, I would say, is a system called Movingo, where the PTAs has opened up also for commercial services by train, bus and coach within the system. Services that are commercially run, not tendered. So that's one of the most successful systems that I know about. And as far as I know, when I speak to my members who's a part of that system, it's working very well. And it's a good dialogue. But of course, it would be good if the PTAs and the commercial operators also could sort of find the solutions and agreements on a wider scale, because I think in the end it's the passengers and the society that benefits from those agreements, as the taxpayers will have to pay less and the passengers get more services.
Thank you. And then one final question from our viewers. I think the right person to answer is maybe Jarkko or Harry. Well, you have to decide yourselves. The question is, do you think that autonomous mobility is the game changer for mobility as a service in a positive way, because it makes the overall mobility systems much more efficient? Harry, would you start?
Yeah, I was quite keen on answering this. In short, yes. That's sort of how we focused our development of the product, that we see that this can really bring so many new pieces to the puzzle, that it can fundamentally change the sort of mobility as a service, as well as the concept of the shared vehicles in essence.
Right. Jarkko, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, the first line of the answer is the same, yes, as Harry said. I do believe that it will help definitely on the cost part, because we all know that the personal costs are quite high when you are running a taxi or a shuttle or coach service. So the driver and the personal costs are quite big. So if we can actually integrate the autonomous buses, shuttles and taxis into the service, I think that is one missing part that we are currently having in order to be able to compete with the ownership of the car at the same cost level. So I would say that yes, we definitely need it and it will help.
Right. Now, finally, and you've all got a maximum 2 sentences each to ask to answer the next question. And I think we'll start with Harry. Your visions for 2030 and beyond.
Well, the future of the mobility is going to be shared, driverless and electric. And we can use the technology to assess the problems like climate change and congestion, while at the same time providing affordable and accessible mobility to everybody equally.
Frida, what's your vision for 2030 and beyond when it comes to bus and coach and public transport industry?
I think we have to focus more around the passenger and the passenger need, and use the technology to have a more flexible traffic than we have today.
Right. Jarkko, your visions.
How long can a sentence be?
2 sentences.
I would like to see a world where we and the other mobility as a service operators have found a way to compete with the private cars with the same level of freedom, and especially competing with each other, because that's where the consumers will get the most out of it. I actually don't think a single company can do it by themselves, because the market and the industry level has been estimated to be in the trillions before 2030. And we don't want to be greedy. We're happy with about 20 to 30% market share. So that would mean 200 to 300 billion euro revenue. So
sounds very humble. Padram, what is your vision for 2030 and beyond?
I guess the public transport sector will need to become more data-driven, more on-demand, more we need to scale more services to the actual need of our passengers. Yeah, it's going to be a difficult future. We did the Oslo study in 2019, where we envisioned a future where autonomous small vehicles were available to everyone. What we see is that unless we make our passengers share the vehicle, we will have a large traffic problem, even if we reduce the number of vehicles on the road. So incentivizing shared use of vehicles is key. Even in the future, we will still need the rail high-capacity lines in our cities, but for the rural areas, the autonomous vehicles can be a game changer.
Right, and then the final word goes to Anna Grönlund. What is your vision for 2030 and beyond for the industry? 2 sentences.
When I think of 2030 and beyond, I think we have managed to build a system that is attractive and that make people choose the bus and coach instead of their own car by their own free will, because we are so good. I used to say, when my husband, who likes to drive his car, choose the bus because it goes forward and passes him on the motorway, then we have succeeded.
That sounds very great, and I think that's a very good note to finish this webinar on. I'd like to thank you all in the panel, and also the BUS2BUS team that arranged this webinar. And I say thank you from me and myself as well, and hand over to Teresa.
Yes, thank you, Ulo, for a great moderation of this event. Thank you to BUS2BUS team who arranged the event as well. And of course, a great thank you to our experts and panelists to contributing to this very, very interesting discussion. And last but not least, thank you so much to our viewers, also for interacting with our experts and sending us good and interesting questions. The next roadshow will be in France in 1 week, so just stay tuned for more information about that. And now we are going to see a short image movie about BUS2BUS. Thank you for me as well.